Welcome to the 2025 State of American Energy. It is such an honor to be here with you today, and a true honor to have with us today the new Majority Leader of the United States Senate, John Thune.
Thanks, Mike.
So, John, you and I have known each other for a very long time. In fact, when I was a young staffer in the Longworth building, your office was right next to ours, and it's such an honor to be here today. Could you have imagined back in those days when you were a young member of Congress that you'd be Majority Leader of the United States Senate?
Well, probably on the 5th floor of the Cannon building. No, at that time, the elevator didn't go all the way up there. You had to take stairs to get to the top floor. But no, it's been a great ride, and obviously learned a lot along the way. And I appreciate, honestly, Mike, the House background I think is really important, and especially now we have unified control of the government, House, Senate, and White House, making sure that they're working together and everybody's rowing in the same direction. Understanding, kind of how the House works and the culture, I think is important. So I'm very grateful for that background and where we started together those many years ago.
Well, we today, one of the big things that we're going to be talking about is what we call the American energy opportunity. That because of this new consolidated government that we have a tremendous opportunity to get big things done for the American people. One of the things that API is going to be rolling out today is our API 5-point policy roadmap as a way to secure our energy future and also reduce inflation. You have an opportunity too, a historic opportunity with consolidated government, with the new president coming in, and with the House of Representatives that is in Republican hands as well. Can you talk to me about some of the things you're going to focus on from an energy perspective as you take the majority?
Well, I mean, I think as you point out, it is a huge opportunity, and having an administration that actually is pro-energy development, working with the Congress, where we want to be supportive in any way that we can in ensuring that the president and his team have success in making America energy dominant. And that happens on a lot of fronts. I mean, a lot of it, you look at the Biden administration policies with regard to banning certain areas to exploration, the heavy-handed regulatory approach that they've taken, which has, I think, had a stifling effect on energy in this country, permitting reform. There's a whole range of things that I think we can and should and will be doing. And a lot of it, in the tax space, the regulatory space, everything with an eye toward making America energy dominant. I think this is an opportunity for an energy renaissance in this country. And, a long time in the making, it will make energy less expensive to people in this country, make us less dependent upon hostile and, adversaries around the world when it comes to our energy needs, and hopefully our ability to be a supplier of energy to some of our allies around the world. So as we think through that agenda, a lot of it's regulatory, a lot of it's on the tax side, some of it's legislative, as I said, trying to come up with easing some of the permitting regulations and requirements. I think there's a whole range of things available. And we have a shared interest in E15, which is something that we didn't get done in the last Congress, and I hope we can get done in this one.
So one of the things that we're a little bit concerned about is, of course, President Trump has made it clear that he's for this energy dominance agenda. And there are going to be a number of executive orders on day one. We want to make sure that that stuff is durable. So how do we make sure that that legislative agenda gets done? What can we do to ensure that it doesn't just stop with executive orders but continues on to legislation?
I think as much as possible, you want to complement what the administration does by executive order through legislation and through funding. And we have talked, of course, I think as you know, about using a legislative vehicle that is available to you when you have unified control of the government. If you have House, Senate, and White House, budget reconciliation is what it's referred to, and it enables you in the Senate to do things at 51 votes that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So typically in the Senate, as I think most people know, there's a supermajority requirement on most consequential legislation. The exception to that is budget reconciliation. And so as we've looked at what is available to us, and frankly the Democrats expanded the scope of reconciliation through their two budget reconciliation vehicles in the last couple of years, ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, and then the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. And so we're looking at how we can build on that, use that template, to find ways to get the funding that's necessary, legislative authority, et cetera, when it comes to the energy space. And so we're examining that. We've got committees, the Energy Committee, which Mike Lee will be chairing, of course, Environment, Public Works, Shelley Capital will be chairing, and the Finance Committee, Mike Crapo, I'm a member of that committee, and we're all working collectively to find the best ways to achieve that objective and to make whatever we do as durable as possible. I mean, one of the things that we're looking at in the tax space, we've got to extend all the 2017 tax cuts, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the Trump tax cuts of 2017 before the end of the year, or you'll see a huge tax increase, a $4.5 trillion tax increase, much of which, or about half of which, will hit people making less than $400,000 a year. So in trying to extend that, we'd like to make it permanent. And permanence has certainty associated with it, and as people make investment decisions, and then they know. And I think that's an objective that we have as part of this, but we want to complement legislatively as much as we can the things that the administration will try and do by executive order and by executive action.
So one of the things that I've been telling everyone about our industry is that we're not asking for anything big in the reconciliation bill. We want to be makers, not takers. We want to be able to help you fund some of your other priorities. So that means how do we open up more federal access to both federal lands and federal waters? Those are key areas where we're really focused on. So we hope as you consider reconciliation that that'll be a top priority or two. But one of the things that I wanted to ask is the pressing question that I think everybody wants to know. One bill or two?
Yeah, right. I never thought there, obviously that's an obsession in this town. Nobody 800 meters from the Capitol cares whether it's one bill or two bill. They just care about what's in it. But it's kind of the parlor game we're now playing. And, however it happens, and we're working through that, one thing is certain, we've got to extend the tax relief before the end of the year. We want to use it as a vehicle to secure the border, which is a huge priority for not only the administration, but for many of us in Congress. And of course, all of our members campaigned on that. And then we want to use it to rebuild our military. And then finally, of course, as I mentioned, for energy dominance. And I think what you talked about doing is opening up some of these areas, streamlining the regulatory process, making it easier, not harder, and less expensive, not more expensive, to develop American energy resources. That's what our objective is all about. And I think it's it's a huge opportunity. It doesn't come along very often, and sometimes doesn't last very long. 2 years from now, we could lose the House, we could lose the Senate. So you have to really maximize the opportunity you have in front of you. And we're trying to figure out how to do that. And the process of how we get there, whether it's one bill or two bills, is an open question. I've argued, as I think you probably know, that there's a real opportunity here to put up some early wins, knowing that we've got to get the tax stuff done in a vehicle later this year, but to deal with energy, to deal with the border, to deal with national security early on.
So one of the other big, powerful tools that Congress has when you have unified government like this is the CRA, the Congressional Review Act, which allows fast-track authority to reverse some of these midnight regulations that we've seen from President Biden. There are a couple of them that are ripe for that. Can you talk through some of the ways that you're thinking about getting this done as some of the day 1, 2, 3 actions?
There are, and we are scrubbing right now to determine what is eligible for that. The Congressional Review Act allows Congress to, with certain regulatory actions, sort of reverse or repeal those through a Congressional Review Act resolution. And so when you talk about CRAs, as we examine, there are a couple of them we were hoping the tailpipe emission, it doesn't fit within there's a certain look-back period, and it doesn't fit within that, so we're not going to be able to use it there. But we are looking for lots of opportunities in that space and trying to argue with the parliamentarian and obviously with others about the whole California waiver issue and how to reverse that, because that was such a radical regulatory overreach. And so trying to figure out a way to roll that back, and we're going to continue those efforts. As I said, our committee chairs and our team are looking at how do we fit that within the parameters of a CRA action that would enable us to do something about that, because that's got to be fixed.
Yeah, what California did was completely radical. And the fact that 17 other states who've waived into this are going to be subject to it it could completely change the vehicle market. So we would highly encourage you to look at that as an option for the CRA, and we believe that you can do it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I know you do, and we'll keep hopefully partnering up with you because it is that important. 35% by 26 and 100% by 2035. It's just, the craziness that continually comes out of California. It's and Lord knows our hearts and thoughts and prayers are with all those folks out there right now with what they're dealing with. But from the regulatory governance standpoint, some of the things that they do are just so counterintuitive and frankly counter to making America energy dominant. We've got to fix that.
You don't think that a rancher in South Dakota wants a Ford Lightning as his primary vehicle?
Go figure, right? Yeah. The take-up rate's not going to be real high on EVs in western South Dakota, I can assure you. Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little. One of our top priorities going into next year, as it has been for many, many years, has been to get permitting reform done. It feels like we're always on the cusp of getting it done, but we can never get it across the finish line. One of the things that I'm going to talk about today is everything else in the API 5-point roadmap really depends on getting comprehensive permitting reform done. Right. So I'd love to get your perspective on whether this is possible this year.
Well, I hope that it is. There are a lot of questions swirling around whether or not that is eligible for budget reconciliation. The conventional wisdom is not, that it's more policy-oriented than revenue-oriented, and that's a distinction for budget reconciliation. It can't be principally about policy. It has to be about spending or revenue. And but there was a sort of bipartisan approach, which almost got enacted at the end of the year. John Barrasso worked on a bill with Joe Manchin, which had a lot of good components in it. It didn't have everything that we wanted in it, but it was a good starting point. But I'm hopeful that with the new Congress, as the House begins their work on it, that we can find some Democrats in the Senate that would enable us to enact permitting reform at the traditional 60-vote threshold. And part of that, I think, will happen because there are a lot of Democrats, and particularly even on the far left, who have projects that they want to see advance that are being blocked right now as well, just because it takes so darn long to get siting and permitting and everything else. So streamlining that process, again, making it easier and not harder, and less expensive, not more expensive, and not getting bogged down in the courts for literally decades. I mean, there are projects out there that get stalled out, and that shouldn't happen. I mean, this is a country that has enormous resources, environmentally sound ways of developing those resources, and in a way that can not only meet our country's needs, and there's going to be a huge demand for energy in the foreseeable future. You look at what the needs of our economy are going to be, and we just flat have to do it. And it's a national security issue too, and I think people sometimes lose sight of that.
That's right. Yeah, we believe that permitting reform has to include judicial reform, reforms to NEPA, and it has to address the Clean Water Act as well. And I do think that we can find bipartisan compromise on that. Yeah. One of the big things that I think we have concerns about is just the ongoing regulatory onslaught that we felt from the Biden administration. I'm hoping that in this year we can also think about how we future-proof future administrations from doing the same kind of regulatory onslaught. So there's been a lot of talk even in your caucus about even enacting the RAINS Act. Can you talk us through how you think about broader regulatory reform as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the RAINS Act. Essentially what that would do is it would subject some of these really overreaching and frankly very expensive regulatory actions taken by an administration to a vote in the Congress. And if there's a certain dollar threshold that is reached, then Congress would end up having to vote on it to validate it. And I think that makes all the sense in the world, because what we've seen is, and frankly I will say this, I think the one thing that, if you look at the first Trump term, the number of judges who went on the courts, 234 I think, if you add up the circuit, and the appellate court, the district courts, and then the Supremes. But those three noms to the Supreme Court and some of the rulings that are coming out there, the Loper decision, which rolled back Chevron deference, is huge. I mean, it really does neuter the administrative state. I think it's a transformational type decision. Now, what does it do? Perhaps gets you into court more too, and that's something obviously we want to address. But as we think about ways to make, when changes are made through the regulatory state, if you will, how do you ensure that there is accountability with the Article I branch of the Congress, or of the Constitution with the Congress, and ensure that some of those actions that are frankly hostile in many cases, in this case to energy production, are, one, we can get them rolled back, but two, subject them to a higher threshold before they can be implemented. And so I think there's a role, obviously, for the judiciary there, the Article III branch of the government. I also think there's a role for the Congress, and the REINS Act would be a great way to do that. And again, it's a question of whether or not we can get that past the threshold that's necessary to include it in reconciliation. But there are a lot of conversations around that.
That's great. I want to shift gears a little bit to the international space as well. We've talked a lot about domestic, but we live in a very dangerous world right now. So I want to talk first about LNG exports to Europe. Of course, the Biden administration imposed a ban on new export terminals at the end of last year. How is Congress thinking about that? And I know it could be subject to a day one reversal by President Trump as well.
Yeah, and I hope that is something that day one they address. Again, that's another example of Biden administration policies that just appear to be very anti-energy, frankly. And so, and if you look at what's happening around the world today, as you point out, it is a very dangerous world, which is why we believe that America has to be prepared to face the threat matrix that exists out there. And part of that is military readiness. It's increasing our top line on defense. And that's one of the issues. We've got a lot of folks who are very interested in being able to use perhaps reconciliation to increase the defense budget in ways that would be hard to do under regular order, to make sure that we're prepared to deal with those national security threats. But another way that we deal with that, of course, is energy production, because so many of our allies learned the hard way that when you become dependent upon hostile nations, adversary nations, for energy, it comes back to bite you. And we certainly saw that with Ukraine, or with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the impact that had on Europe, particularly when it comes to natural gas. So making America, again, more of a resource supplier, not just for American needs, but also for those around the world, I think and our allies around the world, makes the world safer and less dangerous, because some of our allies aren't as subject to hostile regimes.
So you're from a big ag state, South Dakota, and a lot of your work has been to promote American agricultural products overseas. So the new Trump administration is considering changing our trade policy. I want to know how you and the Senate majority are thinking about potential tariffs with some of our trading partners.
Well, it's the conversation around tariffs is a whole new one. And the president obviously is a big believer in tariffs, and as are many people that will populate his administration. Those of us who represent agricultural states have more of a perhaps nuanced view on that, and I think part of it shaped by just the impact that tariffs have in terms of retaliatory actions taken by other countries around the world. So as we think through those policies, I've always believed that tariffs are used selectively, used in a targeted way, represent a good remedy in many cases if there are countries that we're doing business with that are cheating. And I like that approach. I think it does serve a purpose. I think sort of uniform across the board tariffs could be largely problematic in a lot of ways, but we'll work through that. We're starting to have those conversations. Clearly, there are different views among members of Congress on this, and in many cases, again, if you represent an agricultural state, you think of the amount, the volume of South Dakota soybeans, for example, that go to China. It's a half to 2/3, and so there is a symbiotic relationship that we have with some of these countries around the world when it comes to our economies, and that's obviously going to be a consideration for those of us who represent states like that.
So I want to end here on a positive note. Obviously, the United States Senate is set up to be a place for bipartisan compromise. And we think that the things that are most durable, the things that we can actually depend on in the future, get done on a bipartisan basis. I just want to ask you, who are some of the people that we should be working with? Who are some of the bipartisan leaders that we might actually be able to get something comprehensive on energy done in the next Congress?
Well, as you know, I mean, you lost a couple with Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, but somebody's going to step into that void. And I think there are some Democrats that you can work with, at least I hope you can, on energy issues. Anybody who studies or is a student of American, the American economy, or for that matter, America's national security interests, realizes what an important role energy plays. And so I think on these issues like permitting reform, there are, I would say the Virginia senators, the New Hampshire senators. John Fetterman has proven to be kind of somebody who's willing to move in his own direction on occasion. And so we're looking for who those people are. Who are the folks that are going to step into that gap? Angus King, who's an independent from Maine, I hope is somebody that kind of fits into that mold. But as you have those conversations with people, obviously we're interested in what you're hearing back too, because you do need to get anything consequential done in the United States Senate, absent reconciliation, which again is only available in limited circumstances and with pretty tight restrictions about how you use it, you have to have 60 votes in the Senate, which means with 53 Republicans, even if we hold every Republican, we've got to have 7 Democrats. So who are those people that are going to be willing, in the interest, I think, of in our national security interests, our economic security in this country, willing to work with Republicans in a bipartisan way? And I'm a believer in that. I think it's gotten harder in the last few years. The incentive structure in Congress has changed a lot in the last couple of decades. But there's still, to do meaningful things that have durability over time, as you point out, and not subject to one administration or one Congress to the next that can flip things back and forth. Things done in a bipartisan way have that durability, and that creates the certainty that I think you and your members and companies want.
Join me in thanking John Thune, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You're the best.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, guys. Thank you all.